Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 474, After the Victory. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Here, the author looks at the causes of poverty in America and some solutions to poverty in America. Then it's on to After the Victory. Well, now I have Merrill with me. I don't know if he's in camera range, but he's purring. So, after the victory, well, here I look at what society would be like if policies involving honesty and fairness were implemented. Today's show will feature background footage from Locust Peak. To get there, take the Blue Ridge Parkway north of Asheville, North Carolina. Go past Craggy Gardens. It's the second overlook past Craggy Gardens on the right. The Glass Mine Falls overlook. Here, you take the Mount Sissy Trail heading south. You'll come up on Locust Peak and then go down a little bit and then upward to a nice ridge with blueberry patches and some gorgeous views. So now, let's continue with Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Now, let's go to page 186 towards the bottom of the page of Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. Anti-poverty movements are doing just that. People's Action, whose tagline is Join Our Joyous Rebellion, has brought rural and urban poor and working class families together to campaign for housing justice and health care for all. Co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, Reverend William Barber, who has found receptive audiences among struggling black families in deep blue cities and struggling white families in deep red rural counties, advocates for fusion coalitions made up of people of different faiths, ethnicities, and political identities joining together and demanding change from a moral perspective. Poverty abolitionism transcends partisan divides because, frankly, poor and working class people deserve more than either party has delivered for them over the past 50 years. Visionary organizers don't view those people, liberals or conservatives, the young or the old, undocumented immigrants or citizens, as adversaries, but as potential allies in the fight against poverty. They ascribe to the old political wisdom that there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent issues. This can be slow, fraught work, and also electrifying and invigorating work, much like democracy itself. Perhaps the reason protesters often chant, "This is what democracy looks like," is because we can so easily forget. Now it is time for After the Victory. The victory of what? Well, I guess I'm talking about what if the East Side imaginary territory had its way? What happened if what would happen if people from the East Side were in charge of things and can create and implement government policies from education to housing to low income assistance and other things. The East Side imaginary territory. Well, it's an imaginary territory of thought associated with your value system. As your values change, so does the imaginary territory you're associated with. So the imaginary territory you're associated with has the same values, motivations, aspirations, and reasons to do things that you do. Sure. So, if you're a social climber, if you seek wealth over someone's personality, let's say in choosing a life partner, if looks and athletic ability and social status are important, if lying to get ahead on the job or in school or other things are just a way of doing business, well, then you're associated with the West Side imaginary territory. However, if you favor honesty and compassion and equal opportunity for all, and if you don't like deception and try to expose it and root it out, if you believe in sharing knowledge, if you seek personality over looks in your life partner, if things like financial status, job status, looks, and athletic ability, well, if those things aren't that important compared to how someone treats you, well, how kind are they to you? What do you have in common? Sure, these things are important to the East Side. Things like financial gain and social status, well, they come second to honesty, integrity, and finding someone who has similar values as you, someone who's also honest and has integrity, is compassionate, and willing to share knowledge so that others may get ahead, especially the poor and the exploited. Sure, the East Side doesn't believe company secrets should be kept for long, where the West Side thinks they should be kept for a long time. So, what if the East Side had its way? What would it be like? Well, I guess in some ways I have experienced it, at least to some degree, sure. But things could change, in government policy towards education, housing, assistance to the poor, and other things. But way back when, around 1970 and 1971, well, I guess it might have been earlier, perhaps 1969, I guess I was in second grade. Yeah, just 8 years old. I started school a year late because of my marginal autism. And one of my favorite things to do was ooh, especially in second grade and preceding. I could do it quite well, and I did it quite often. Let's say 4 years old to 8 years old. Sure. I would take a stick or a string or perhaps a frayed Hot Wheels track, and I would hold it up on my head and twirl it in front of my face, making funny noises, hisses, and who knows what, probably grimacing in my face. I would maybe have spastic movements. I would shut down perception. I wouldn't really see what's around me. Maybe not even hear it that much. Instead, I would see and hear what I'm thinking about. Often, something involving motion, like an airplane taking off, or landing, or a car going around an exit ramp on a perfect cloverleaf intersection. How wide would you have to make the turn? How much banking should you have on it? I guess as a 5 and 7-year-old, I thought about civil engineering. See, when you take a cloverleaf intersection, if you go on the exit ramp at a steady speed and you hold the wheel steady, following the curve perfectly. If you're the passenger and you stare straight ahead, it will appear like the world is spinning beneath your feet. This is probably not a good idea to try if you're the driver. As I said, as a passenger, look at the horizon and watch the world turn beneath you as you go around the cloverleaf exit ramp. So, I would ooh about all sorts of interesting things. Well, I would do it at school too. Second grade and preceding. Sure, especially at recess. And there comes the bullies. Sure, they're giving me a hard time. They're laughing at me, calling me retard, and names like that. Gee, was it much fun? Well, I went to the teacher, and, well, the teacher straightened out these bullies, and then I was able to ooh in peace. Perhaps later on that year, or the next year, maybe around 1970, 71, I heard it. Well, the Three Dog Night song, Black and White, sure. And then a child could understand that this is the law of all the land. Sure, the song's about the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision, resulting in the desegregation of schools. Well, sure, it was desegregation, but by 1969 and 1970, at least up in New York, I like to think that it went further. Sure, it did. To include equal opportunity for people like me with marginal autism. Sure. And equal protection from bullying and harassment. Sure, I see this song as a victory song for autism. The gentle drumbeat at the beginning, it almost makes me cry, knowing victory is at hand. Sure, and that I won't be mistreated or bullied. In the distant past, even before this, perhaps when I was 3 or 4 years old, and I was first diagnosed with marginal autism, my parents asked the doctor for the prognosis of my autism. My father asked, "What's the worst that can happen?" The doctor replied, I would have to go to special school, for special needs kids who had similar autism or worse autism or other mental conditions. My mother asked what would be the best outcome. The doctor said that I could go to normal school would be the best outcome and integrate with the rest of the students. Well, eventually I did. And I guess that time period, second grade, going into third grade, well, then I became more integrated. I guess in first grade, the teacher would ask the students to do something. Pick up your pencils and write down whatever. I wouldn't pay attention. I didn't care. I would be staring out the window. I might even be oohing in class. Then in second grade, I got a little better. And the teacher would say, everyone, and Robert, take out your pen and paper. Well, when I heard the teacher say Robert, I knew I had to follow and do what my classmates were doing. By third grade, the teacher would just say, everyone take out your pencils and papers, and I knew that included me, and I would act accordingly. So I became more and more integrated with my fellow classmates, and I oohed less and less. But then I wondered about people's values, if they were deceptive, and what path that would lead them down for the rest of their lives. And if they were honest and compassionate, and what would become of their lives if they held those values. Sure, I thought about this as a 9-year-old. You betcha I did. So, well, I did better in school because of equal protection and accommodation. Sure. And all that came from desegregation. So, now let's jump ahead to the present. Sure, now we're 50 years later. Well, the bullies are still out there. I guess both old bullies, but especially the young bullies in school. Sure, back in second grade. Who are they bullying now? Well, I guess kids with autism and Asperger's and other special needs. But what about transgender kids? And what about kids, well, who are androgynous, who you can't quite tell if they're a boy or a girl? A lot of kids are like that. They might not be transgender, they're just androgynous. But they'll probably be labeled as transgendered and bullied as such. Perhaps they'll never get to explain that they're not transgender. They just look the way they do. They can't help it if they're a boy that looks kind of like a girl, or if they're a girl that looks kind of like a boy. That doesn't mean they're transgender. Well, it might, and it might not. But they're going to be bullied probably nevertheless, and not be able to explain their position in a proper and fair fashion. Sure, we need to stick up for these kids. We need to stick up for, well, I guess everyone who's kind of unique. Because unique people can take us to special places. Sure, they can. I remember going to see my niece graduate at the University of Delaware. Yeah, I guess it was, well, back around 2015, 2016. And I guess the Dean of Students gave a wonderful graduation speech about conformity, about how people push for conformity, try to make a square peg fit in a round hole, try to make everyone like a perfect brick. But I'm the square peg who won't fit in the round hole. And I'm the misshapen stone that won't make a good brick. The dean went on to emphasize how these people are special and important. It was really touching for me. It really made me feel like someone special. But now we have to look at things in modern time. Sure. Can we make it to after the victory? Can the East Side Imaginary Territory really win and really influence and change the way things are done in this country and elsewhere? Sure, we have to look at this. And I guess it all starts with what I was talking about. School. Sure. We need good public schools that any student could attend. Anyone. Well, regardless of their race or their financial status, or where they live, or whatever. Sure, we have that. We have public schools in place that support all students. Unfortunately, charter schools are becoming more widespread. These are typically private schools, often religious. So these religious private schools, well, they might be doing us harm in several ways. First of all, they might, teach the students to have faith. And by having faith in religious leaders and religious ideas, they do less independent thinking of their own. Independent thinking, critical thinking, the ability to analyze and break down a problem or a situation is critical. We don't want to follow a religion or a religious leader. We want to follow what is right. That's why I often talk about imaginary territories instead of religion. Because it's your morals, it's your attitude, it's why you do things, it's your motivations, it's things like that that count. Not what religion you are. For religions are often deceptive. such as the prosperity gospel. Sure, give some preacher money, and it will come back to you tenfold. Tithe 10% of your earnings, and God will take care of you. Well, this, of course, may or may not happen. What typically happens is preachers get over demanding for money. They get greedy. And they often admit what they need it for, especially these preachers of mega churches. They might need a new Learjet. The parishioners will gladly contribute to that, thinking that God will reward them in the future for that. Well, perhaps God will, and perhaps God won't. But the thing is, a lot of these religious leaders just want to impose their will on everyone. They want this country to become a Christian nation. And, well, this Christianity might include wealth concentration and racism and segregation. Sure, they might not say this right off the bat, but just think about it. Think about these charter schools, private schools, able to make their own rules. Well, eventually, some of the rules they might make, well, might lead to students of various races that are not white being marginalized somehow. Perhaps they'll make a rule that Spanish can't be spoken in the school, negatively impacting Spanish students. Perhaps they'll have dress code and hairstyle restrictions, affecting all students, but perhaps especially black students. Sure, they want everyone to fit into the same mold, but Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.